Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week, our guest is the artist of the new Power Man and Iron Fist series at Marvel. It's Sanford Greene. Thanks for coming on the show, Sanford.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start because I kind of feel like this conversation could go all over the place, but I want to start with Power Man and Iron Fist because I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It was a really, really great first issue.
Thank you.
But I have to ask, I'm always curious about things like this. What were those days leading up to its release like? Were you getting nervous at all?
Well, I coined it in I guess in the vein of having your first child.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we discussed off record. You know, you don't have any kids yet, but when you do, when you guys decide to start having them, and you know that moment is near. Trust me, it is nothing. There's no greater feeling than that.
Mm-hmm.
The anticipation of it, the excitement, the nervousness, the fear, the doubt. You know, everything that comes along right before you have that child, and then you have the child,
mm-hmm.
and it's incredible. You know, you can't even put it into words. Now, you know. Mind you, doing a comic, you know, in many ways is not as great as having your first child, but mm-hmm. the same types of angst and the different feelings that come along is very similar. So, you know, once the book was out, though, I can actually share this. The day that it came out, I just went away. I didn't look at the internet or anything. You know, because, you know, it's just one of those things like every 5 seconds you would want to see, well, what do they say? What are they thinking? You know, it's like you just drive yourself nuts. But in a lot of ways, that was very therapeutic. Truth be told, too, I actually had a book signing that day, the same day.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of planned it that way, too, because it's one thing that, you know, you're looking at a bunch of faceless, you know, names online talking about your work, but it's a whole different animal when you're face to face with people and you're having that actual conversation about your work.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought it would be very good for me to, you know, not only get away but also go out and just be amongst the people. I know that sounds somewhat kind of hokey, but yeah, I just wanted to be out there and just be amongst the fans. And truth be told, I mean, we've got nothing but great reviews about this book, so I'm actually very humbled by that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, all my fears and doubts and stuff, you know, leading up to it, all the anxieties was quickly cast away by, you know, all of this other, you know, these words of admiration and things of that nature. So, you know, again, I'm just humbled by that.
Yeah. Well, it actually makes a lot of sense that you'd be, you know, want to be out at a shop or something like that on the day of release, just because, I don't know, when you think about musicians and stuff, when they have a new album come out, they tend to be doing a show or something so they can have like the revelry of being amongst the people to celebrate this new release and stuff. And
absolutely.
And I don't know, it's pretty, it makes a lot of sense. Plus it also gets you off the internet, so it's like the double threat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that was my master plan, and I will probably do that every issue. You know, I'm just gonna go to a store, a local comic shop, or what have you, and just be amongst the folks there.
Mm-hmm. I totally understand the feeling of wanting to get away, because it's like, you know, with the internet, it's always coming. It's like it's deluges over and over and over of information, and when you have something new like that, I imagine, like, if you wanted to, you could be looking at something new every, like, 5 to 10 seconds. Like, somebody's making a tweet being like, Power Man and Iron Fist is amazing, or, you know, something else. And it's like,
oh, yeah.
It's easy to obsess over those things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I talk to a lot of artists, friends in the industry, and we all have the same struggle with just the distraction, the temptation of just online and the whole, just that whole zeitgeist, if you will, this immediate information and having immediate feedback and all of these things that just kind of feed our narcissistic our psyche, and it's very challenging with media and the immediate gratification or something else that can come from that, negative responses or things of that nature, which honestly can be even more of a rabbit hole that you go down, because if you get one negative reply or response to something that you may have worked on, then you're kind of just shell shocked a little, and you're constantly trying to find something that would nullify that. So you keep going back to the internet looking for, it's almost like that whole, I guess, you can use the phrase one rotten apple, because you can have 1,000, praises and then have one that's negative, and
you remember that one.
Yeah, just kind of, you just zero in on that, and but I've learned to channel a lot of that and realize, it is just one. It's not 1,000. For every few hundred people that like your work, you're gonna have at least one person that's gonna come out and say, I don't like it. And hey, that's people. There are people, honestly, that didn't like the Star Wars film that when it just came out. What are you gonna do? And it still made $1 billion. So it is what it is.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I need to learn from you, but still. So what I was actually, speaking of online, when we were originally, talking and everything, I was looking through your Twitter, and it seemed to me, just by looking at your tweets and stuff, that you were really enjoying the experience of working on the book. And and I really love the Christmas card that you had created, kind of Christmas cardish of sorts, of Luke and Danny with the sweet Christmas and everything. And in all honesty, Sanford, it was a huge selling point for me, because you could just feel how much you were connecting with it. But what makes this project so appealing to you personally?
Well, just grew up with the characters. So that sentimentality of just really taking me back to my childhood, that's why most of the creators that you see are in this industry. That's why, people like yourself are into it, because you have that was that emotional connection since you were a kid. And, whether you go away from it for a while or whether you have been in it since you started up until now, there's a connection. There's an emotional connection there. And some people, they go as far as just collecting comics, and then you have the next step where people want to create them. And this is one of the books that got me started, not only collecting but creating. And that's I guess full circle. One of the books that got me into wanting to not only read but create is now the thing that I'm actually creating that's professionally. So, it's pretty cool.
That is cool. So I have to ask, did you make Power Man and Iron Fist comics when you were a kid?
I did not. What's funny was I never really drew Power Man and Iron Fist. I was just inspired by it.
Oh, okay.
As a kid, all I drew was my own characters, which is kind of funny. Well, I guess it's not. It's kind of I don't know if the word prophetic or what have you, but just being able to kind of see beyond the Marvel or the DC, characters, and start to, dive into my own. I think a lot of young creators go that route, and then they kind of come back. Maybe they start out doing, characters from a Marvel or a DC comic, and then they kind of branch off into their own, and then they kind of come back to later on. They come back to creating those Marvel DC characters. I know for me, it was kind of like, it was a back and forth kind of deal, but never drew Luke and Danny back then. Maybe Luke, I did him a few times here and there, but there were always different iterations, of him. Like, or I would just take some liberties on his design. Like the tiara, would be, I don't know, around his forearms, or something. It will be more like wristbands, and the
Right.
And the tiara and the hair might be, more like dreads or so. It was just different things that I would try to play up on with the character to try to make it my own.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you were marrying like your interest in creating your own while also like using that influence of Luke Cage.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, I really loved the first issue, but one of the things I really liked about it was a lot of times when you read comics, and like this isn't to defame other artists or anything like that, but a lot of times people just kind of have like similar builds and similar. It's like they all kind of feel like they came from like the same body type, but
right.
like there's like if you look through the entire issue, specifically there's a scene when they're in the Excelsior Diner and like you see Luke sitting next to Danny, and you can just really see the size difference.
Right.
And I love that they're hugely different people. And you really approach them as such. Like you approach them with their own. Like I find that Danny kind of there's like a mixture of like a childlike glee and then also like a almost Bruce Lee style energy, swagger to him. And then Luke's just kind of more of a like he just feels like he's in control of the situation. You can tell that through your art. But how did you approach figuring these characters out visually?
I think just to some of your points. I wanted to, my influences, from I guess at least 10 years now, have come a lot from animation. And a lot of my work over the years have evolved into a lot of the types of structures that you would see from animation, and I quickly, started to adapt kind of the urban influences along with that. And I realized that, they're kind of almost one and the same, exaggerated, poses and postures and, things of that nature. And it just creates a type of energy, even in stagnant images. If you have this big, bulky, broad shoulders guy just standing there, just if you make the silhouette, you push those proportions, it just makes that stagnant figure not stagnant anymore. You know what I mean? Same thing with a wiry, more, I guess, muscular type of posture as well. Even a voluptuous figure, just the more you push proportions, the more you create this narrative without even really having, the story there, to start with. Like when you see Luke, you already, you just described him perfectly. He's in control. His size it's almost like that gentle giant kind of, motif that comes from that eludes from him. Vice versa, you got this, high energy, kinetic, devil may care posture and figure like Danny, who, again, just really playing off of one another. And I've said this many times, I wanted to create kind of a lethal weapon with superheroes kind of you know,
Yes.
mantra when it comes to these guys. But you know, um, with that in mind, I wanted to make sure that, okay, how can I make sure when you see this character without even knowing anything about him, you could tell this is the kind of person he is, or this is the kind of person she is, you know, so on and so forth. So, and in animation, silhouette is really really important. And that was one of the things. And I'm not an animator. I'm a very big student of it, and I really just kind of dive into a lot of the inner workings of it. And you know, one of the things that I came away with that's very important in that field is creating interesting silhouettes. And I was always kind of a stickler. I mean, you know, there's some illustrators, like some of the classic guys, like George Perez, who, for what he does, it's absolutely amazing, but it works for what he does. So we already have a George Perez. I just feel like, you know, you already have this illustrator, this artist, who is a legend at what he does. Let's see another artist create their own, you know, interpretation of, you know, how to illustrate these characters. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, totally.
It just feels like, you know, there were at the time, at least coming up, I felt like, you know, there were too many George Perez's, you know, in the comic industry. And man, when people like, I mean, for what it's worth, and I'll be quite honest about this guy. When Rob Liefeld first came on the scene, I'm talking initially.
Yeah.
It blew me away. You know, here I am. I'm a kid, and I'm like, wow. You know, I was attracted to these bombastic figures. You know, they really pushed, and you know, I hate to use the word wonky, but that seems to be the easy word to slide in there. I was just attracted to it. It had a lot of life and energy. Now, you know, that was at the beginning, and you know, I don't know, you know, his work. You know, you can take it or leave it or whatever, moving forward. But initially, his work, it just attracted. I was attracted to it. You know, many illustrators like that, and I know that he got it from something other than comics, if that makes sense. I'm pretty sure he got that from other influences outside of comics.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
No, I was just going to say, I do think it's interesting. I've actually talked to a lot of artists who, you know, like that energy spoke to them. It wasn't necessarily like the figure work or anything like that, but
Right.
I do think that one thing that really was interesting about him as an artist is like you look at that period, and like I grew up in like my heyday for my formative years for reading comics was like the mid to late 90s, I guess, maybe like 92 to basically 99. And like there was a lot of Jim Lees out there. I mean, there was Jim Lee, but then there was like lots of other Jim Lees, but Rob Liefeld was different. And I think that energy and that like he just kind of did his own thing element to his art kind of was inspirational for some people who maybe just didn't fit into a box so easily.
Right. You know, and that was the thing, is just not really, you know, fitting into that box, breaking out of it. I mean, you know, I came up on that era with him, and then shortly after that, of course, the big Image push. But then really what really helped me to see that I wasn't crazy in thinking, you know, because even at a young age, you know, as a kid coming up, you know, 15, 16 years old, I always had this feeling, you know, at that time anyway, I had this notion that comics need to be kind of depicting from animation. And then, you know, artists like Joe Madura, he came along, and man, you know, his work, and even Jim Lee at that time, you can tell that he was watching a lot of anime, things of that nature. Will Patasio was another one at that time that really kind of just got me, and this is that, again, that right around that image era. And I saw that, you know what, these guys, I know where this is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that this was a possibility to bring in these different, proportions and different types of, narratives that would lean towards animation.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't fully understand all of the fundamentals, but I definitely understood the emotion.
Yeah.
Like I connect, and that was the thing. There was most artists, and I tell this to students a lot too, that your art is going to you're first going to draw from emotion. You're going to draw what you feel good about,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're going to feel like I like, not me, but just a student. I should say, a student would say, "Well, I love drawing, anime characters." Like, I get it all the time. When I look at kids' portfolios, some of the younger kids, the first types of drawings in their portfolios are like Dragon Ball Z.
Right.
It's like this goes without, without fail. And then you see those characters, and they all, like, even their characters look like they have the same forms and the same, action poses and things of that nature. And I always tell them, this is your emotion right now. This is what you feel good about. Now it's time to draw from the foundation standpoint, the things that will help you get to this place here, because those different types of characters and things of that nature, I tell them all the time that stuff comes from something. It doesn't come just from emotion. They have their emotion and their feeling on their drawings is underneath all of that is foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why those things, which is why you connect with it, but you connect with it without really understanding why you connect with it.
Right.
It's just the feeling is just there.
It's like you like the idea, but you don't know the reason why you like it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I was just going to say, like, I actually read an interview with you earlier that really, there was one line in there that really surprised me, and I would never have guessed it, but you shared that your biggest influence is Norman Rockwell.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's fascinating because it's like, I think most people would probably look at your art and they would think, like, that maybe animation is in there and things like that. But like Norman Rockwell, like, it really shows that, I don't know, inspiration, like, you can be inspired by certain types of artists, but that doesn't necessarily mean stylistically you have to match them.
Right. And as you grow artistically, your views will broaden, your understanding of art will widen. You will begin to appreciate things that you did. Like, I was just talking to someone about, I don't know if you're familiar with this artist. He drew Marvel comics for a while. His name is Tony Salmons.
No.
Okay. Look him up. I'll put it this way. No way was I remotely close to being attracted to his work back during the image boom. His work was not bombastic. His work was not push proportions or anything. Actually, it was, but I just didn't see it because all I saw, again, because my frame of reference back then was all emotion. It was just like, wow, that looks cool, therefore it's good. Or what I mean? What I mean?
Yeah,
it's like,
totally.
Your understanding is still limited at that time, but I saw his work then, and I just, man, I closed the book. I said, I don't know what this is. Put it to the side, you know, talking about a whole, 180, Rob Liefeld was on the top of the list then, and Tony Salmons was, I would, return the book or throw it away even. Now, this guy, I comb the internet trying to find his stuff. He didn't do a lot of work. He did some European stuff, and I think he's still doing some other small. He's kind of a Dave Mazzucchelli kind of illustrator.
I'm looking at his stuff right now, and the black and white, like his black and white stuff is incredible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there was a podcast they recently stopped airing, but there was a podcast called Sidebar, and they would highlight a lot of illustrators, comic illustrators, concept artists, things of that nature, and they would go back and just highlight and maybe have like a discussion on illustrators like a Tony Salmons or Milton Caniff. I mean, of course, I'm going way back now, and Bernie Fuchs. I'm trying to think of I'm just giving you random names. Jim Holdaway, who's a huge influence of mine right now. He's an artist that illustrated this European comic strip series back in the 60s called Modesty Blaze.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Man, I got all of his collections here in my studio. Just fascinating work. Again, my frame of reference over time just grew. So somebody like a Norman Rockwell, he was kind of the linchpin of me seeing beyond comic books.
Right.
I started seeing his work and noticing, wait a minute, there's a lot of the things that I try to do, I'm trying to do in my work, but for some reason I'm missing. There's some dots. I'm not connecting all the dots. And I studied his work, and I realized, I started to realize, his work is realism cloaked in cartoon. A lot of people won't really, unless you just study it or you're just in tune to it, you won't think about it like that. You just think, oh wow, I just love his work. But people that aren't in tune to that, they are connected to his work because it's grounded in realism, but the cartooniness gives it more than, it gives it that extra, push from life, like a kid sitting in a corner with his arms folded and he's pouting, you see his photos and, the reference to photos, and it looks just like the photos, but then there's something else there too.
Right.
He may push the proportion a little bit more, or he may, widen the eyes, or, the lips may have more accent to it, or what have you. Those little things, and that's when I started to kind of see. Wait a minute, he's using photos, but he's cartooning it, so you still see it's still depicting life, but you're getting something extra. Which is why I love looking at illustration work. Comic illustration work like that. Photorealistic work just doesn't work at all for me in comics. Maybe in like a one image kind of thing, like a cover or something like that, it may be fine. But even then, it's not interesting. What really interests me is those illustrations that push the boundaries, but it's still grounded. That's the thing. And I guess to some degree, all illustration can say that to some degree, but then there's some that kind of hit that mark more than others.
I think it was Michael Lark I was talking to about this on my podcast, but we had talked about how artists of any variety, not just comic artists, are really just kind of putting their filter on the world. And
Mm-hmm.
and like you look at Norman Rockwell, and I totally see what you're saying. It is based off of photos, but there's like, I don't know, there's a different layer there that adds to it. And it's the same with, other artists. Like, I always find it really fascinating that I think when I was a kid, I just envisioned that like everybody was like reading, all the artists were like looking at the same stuff I was. But, when I talk to artists these days, like I find out that they were, looking at people like Tony Salmons and like looking at, a person who's mentioned a lot is Jorge Zafino.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
like that was somebody I'd never even heard of before. That was Michael Lark again. I talked to him and he brought up Jorge Zafino and ended up getting Winterworld. And I was like, holy crap, how did I never hear about this?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just fascinating.
Yeah. It's just going back to what I said. I mean, all of those illustrators, just you as you grow and you begin to understand, now your frame of reference, you're able to comprehend what you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes you accept that work, because you can comprehend it now. It's like, oh wow, because I've understood the foundational understanding is stronger. Now I can accept and really see, not just accept, but I can really embrace what I'm seeing here now,
Mm-hmm.
because your frame of reference is just stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, it's I really can't add anything to that because it was perfect. You ruined me, Sanford. How dare you?
I love talking about artists. I'm actually looking at my bookshelf, or one of them anyway, and I believe it or not, I didn't care for Alex Toth back then.
Mm-hmm.
You showed me a comic, it looked boring. It didn't have enough lines. The more I tell kids, students, this as well. And again, as your frame of reference grows, you begin to understand these things. But then I thought lines meant confidence in good art.
Mm-hmm.
The more lines, the more cross-hatching and uplighting and all that, crazy, unnecessary stuff. The more you do it, the better the art looks.
Yeah.
But that saying goes, less is more. So, I look at a Toth and I'm like, God, this guy's a master. I mean, he's so confident in where he's going with his work. He will lay down 3 lines and you have some form there, a very recognizable, palatable form. And that's all he leaves you there. He leaves it right there. And I think that this is so profound because, I'll speak for myself. I would do that same kind of notion, just trying it out. And I immediately feel insecure.
Yeah.
I feel like I gotta add another line there. That's not enough. How about a little shadow here? I'm doing this this series, how I ended up doing this was just happenstance, I guess. I'm doing this series for Black History Month where I'm doing one, famous, Black person a day, and for the whole entire month.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just doing these portraits pretty much. And initially I was like a fish out of water, and I was very happy about that in a weird way, because now I knew that I'm doing something that I'm not comfortable with. Here's an opportunity to grow, and the first few drawings, man, they were, they were cross hatching and all kinds of extra line work, and I'm like, I'm doing the very thing that I tell people, students, hey, you're doing that because you're not confident.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I'm not confident. not confident in the way this is going. So pulled out Alex Toth, sketchbook, got humbled as I'd studied his work, looked at a little bit of other illustrators like a Milton Caniff, Al Williamson, who's, oh my goodness, this guy, look at their brush control and things of that nature, how every line had a place. It wasn't just random, just chaos. It was very thought out, purposeful line work. And then I said, okay, I see it now, or at least I'm beginning to see now. And I went in and I started to illustrate, and it's been very gratifying, very taxing, but very gratifying. Taxing in a sense of more from the physical standpoint, because I'm trying to do these things early in the morning before I start my actual work day, and I'm tired and I want to do something else like sleep or whatever, But it's been good. I think at the end of all of that, I'm going to do a nice little essay on what I learned from it. Part of it is what I'm saying right now. But yeah, kind of going back to what you were saying about just discovering these artists and really being just amazed by these different illustrators. It's such a cool thing. I constantly, I could be listening to a podcast and I'll hear someone mention, Alex Raymond for another master. I would jump on the internet immediately and, of course, Google him, which is fascinating. Just be able to Google these guys now. It's like, oh my God, and you got everything they ever worked on. Well, almost. And, I'm just sitting there for hours and just, it's really awesome just to be able to have that kind of reference at your fingertips now.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing is like, I was saying about how I'd never heard of Zafino, but the funny thing is like, while we're having this conversation, I can not that I'm not listening, but I can go on my phone and I can just be like, oh, like I'm going to look up, Tony Salmons and like, there you go. Now I know what his art looks like. And it's the amount of the access we have these days to finding these masters and everything like that is really incredible. But one thing I think is really interesting is I remember when I was growing up and like even into my adulthood as a comic reader, like a lot of times I would see detail and I was like, that person's really putting in like that person's really doing it. They're really adding a lot of detail and it's really adding a lot to the art. But you're talking about Toth and everything, and it's just like detailed isn't necessarily everything. It works for some people, but like I don't know. I think sometimes people have a perspective of what good art looks like, but then you realize that there's merit in a lot of different things that aren't just detail or aren't just simplicity or anything like that.
Right. And like there's this guy right now who's pretty much I would call him a phenom in I guess the illustration world, or even in the comic illustration world, Kim Jung-gi. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, of course, everyone, if you have a Instagram or Facebook page or whatever, this guy's work. You've seen his work. And here's an artist who is the total opposite of, someone like a Toth or whatever. And yet with all of his line work, it still conveys this naturalistic, organic feel to his illustrations. He can have lots of line work. It's not a lot of unnecessary line work, but it's still detailed with line work, and yet you see so much life in his illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty incredible stuff. So, and he can, and I find this with some illustrators, you can look at guys like him or someone like Stuart Eminem,
mm-hmm.
who's another, he's a master, and you look at their work, and you can see them doing somewhat of a pseudo realism kind of illustration, but you can tell underneath that, based on the forms, that they can push this thing in a way that, you know, is beyond where they are, where they're illustrating at that point. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just because I've seen Eminem, seen his sketchbook. I have a few of his sketchbooks. Had the pleasure of meeting him and chatting with him a few years ago at a Heroes Con in Charlotte. And, you know, I saw his sketchbook and I said, I knew it. You know, he had this really, really simplistic, very, you know, animated influence stuff in there. And I said to him, I said, I knew it. I knew that a lot of your work, you could go here if you wanted to, because I see it in even all your detailed work. Because again, it a bunch of lines and a bunch of, you know, unnecessary, you know, overworked, you know, pieces for illustration. You know, you do that stuff, and it kills the movement of a illustration.
Mm-hmm.
But if you fully understand, you know, the theory of less is more, even when you do those, you know, those rendered lines, you know where to put them, and you leave it there. You don't put unnecessary lines. So you still get that same energy, even though it's detailed with line work, it has that energy there. It's not lost in line, a bunch of rendered lines.
Mm-hmm. I think Eminem is incredible because one of the things that I find so impressive about him is he can really do anything. Like you look at Russian Olive to Red King, and then you look at like Star Wars, and then you look at like Next Wave. And Next Wave, there's that one issue where he just all of a sudden becomes Mike Mignola, and you're just like, what the hell? It's amazing. But
yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, you know, you said movement, and that was one thing I was going to ask you about. You know, you said before that animation was a big influence for you, and it was something you think about. But when I look at like the book, and this may just be me reading too much into your art, but like I look at Luke, and like there's like a stillness to him, and then like Danny, he's like there's like a weird like almost bouncing nature to him. He's got like he's just filled with energy. But when you're drawing, this is going to sound weird maybe, but do you think in motion? Like, are you approaching it with like I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it, but I just see like motion on the page in a weird way that I don't necessarily see with every artist.
Right.
Is that a way you think about your art when you're approaching it?
Oh, absolutely, man. I understand what you're saying. There's a book, this little, you know, manual. I'll call it the manual called "How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way."
I have that.
Look at it, and you will see where it comes from, which is amazing. That they even then, way back then, they understood that. This is why, you know, John Buscema is one of the masters. You know, you look at his work and you see so much movement. Again, another artist that has rendered lines, but they aren't unnecessary lines. Those lines move with the form. They don't fight against it. And it gives you that feeling of this power and weight and motion. And that's where I got it from. They did an exercise. There's an exercise in the book that shows a person running on one illustration, and then right next to it, there's the same, you know, there's a person running, but now the motion is pushed a little bit more. Like the arms are up a little higher, the knees are up a little higher, the neck is kind of stretched a little more, and just those few gestures it changes the whole, feeling of the illustration. Even someone standing, they're standing on one illustration where the legs are more together and the arms are, you know, I forgot what it was. The arms are a little more kind of mechanical looking,
Yeah.
and very next illustration, the legs are out a little wider and the arms are a little more free, like more, non-symmetrical, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. And just those things, as a kid, I started to intake before I even understood how to draw anatomy. I understood motion.
Hmm.
So, a lot of people, think when they look at my work, they say, "Man, you have so much movement and motion." And I was like, "Dude, I was looking at that before I even looked at how to draw the human body." Um, because that was a thing. It just spoke to me because, again, I'm thinking in terms of like animation.
Hmm.
You know, that felt like, you know what, I can't draw animation, but if I do this, it feels like I'm getting I'm getting some of that those I'm getting some of that emotion again, getting some of that I when I see in a really nice animated piece, the feeling that I get from that, I'm almost getting that same feeling when I look at this illustration.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I'm actually looking at that book right now, and it's talking
I can
about,
tell. I
yeah.
can tell when I say something and he's looking it up right now. Hey,
Well,
that's what you have to do, man. You can't, strike while the iron is hot.
well, yeah. I mean, it is funny because like I tore this book apart when I was a kid. I had one of those, like, I don't know. I got one when I was like probably 5 or 6.
Right.
And because when I was growing up, I always wanted to be a comic artist. That was what I wanted to be more than anything. The problem is I could just never, like, for some reason in my head, I could just never figure it out. And that's the same thing for most things visually. I work well with words, but I'm not great with art. And like just looking at this and like having you explain that while also looking at that page of the person running, it's weird. It's like it's kind of unlocking that in my brain a little bit. Not saying I'm going to be your challenger for the next, issue of Power Man and Iron Fist, but I mean it's interesting hearing you say that and express that. It's just, I don't know. It gives me additional understanding of motion in art, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Unlocking those, we all have it on some level. It's just a matter of someone showing it to you to unlock it, or you just discovering it on your own.
Hmm. And you discovered it on your own, it sounds like.
At least that part, yeah. I mean, there's certain things that you'll understand on your own, and then there's other things that you just have to be shown.
Hmm. So to get back to Power Man and Iron Fist a little bit, and I apologize. Hopefully, it didn't seem like I was distracted. I was just like, man, how does, like, it's like you read the book differently than me. The How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. I was like, I feel like an idiot. I looked at that book so many times and I didn't even remember that.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think and it could be just honestly when you looked at the book. I was a kid and all I had was that book. So I would sleep with the book. It's like
yeah.
one of those things. Whereas another person could be looking at it and they have exams for college. It's just where you're at in your life. Sometimes where it can determine what you get out of something. So
Yeah. No, and the funny thing is I actually, my original copy was like, because like I said, I used to look at it all the time. It had gotten to the point where it was basically in tatters, and my wife had no idea that I had that book before. But we've been married for almost 3 years now, and she got me that book for my birthday like a year and a half, or like 2 years ago. And
mhm.
it's funny because I have this like pristine copy now, and it's like, I don't know, I kind of miss my copy that was in tatters. It's weird how that works, but
Well, it's that whole thing of it feels like you did something with it.
yeah,
Like it was
yeah,
actually used.
yeah, absolutely. But okay, so back to Power Man and Iron Fist. I wanted to ask about um, one thing that I thought was really interesting is, and I had mentioned how I really like the different body types, but if you look through like the book, I mean, of course you've looked through it many times, but all the characters look different. Like
Right.
you have like there's this one scene where Luke and Danny are walking down the street. And like you have all these people taking pictures of them, and then you have this dude who's like got this selfie stick, and he's taking the picture of himself while pointing.
Right.
And it's just like you look through it, and there's a lot of detail to the world. Like, and we go to the Excelsior Cafe, and you have all the pictures of Stan Lee with like varying people and everything. And I presume it's Stan Lee.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's not that you're looking to provide all the detail to it, but you want it to be recognizably New York City. Is that kind of what you're going for? You want it to feel like the real world?
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, a friend of mine. Well, he was somewhat of a teacher, mentor, illustrator friend of mine. A long time ago, said the better your reference, the better your art.
Mm-hmm.
I reference almost every panel
Mm-hmm.
when I'm doing work. Whether I take photos myself or whether I just go online and go, okay, what does a cafe really look like, from an interesting angle?
Mm-hmm.
Can get a straight on shot pretty much from any, but, I'm not going to necessarily find that online. So I may have to go out and
Go to an actual cafe.
yeah, go to an actual cafe and take pictures and, make people look at me all kind of weird, when they see me taking photos in their cafe, but, trying to make it as authentic as possible. And honestly, I feel like I've gotten better at that even by issue 2.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that I saw, and then in issue 3, I'm trying to wrap that up right now. It's like, it's like one of those things where I'm like, wow, I did not, it's like, again, unlocking these chambers.
Mm-hmm.
We all have these different chambers when it comes to this type of thing, and it just makes so much more sense to me now. Again, the better your reference, the better your art.
Yeah. Another thing I really liked was the fact that like Luke and Danny are actually basically they're basically wearing relatively normal clothes. Like, I mean, Danny's not entirely, but like there's that one scene where he's putting on like the top, and I've never really thought of that outfit. I never really thought of that as like a 2-piece outfit, but
Right.
but it is, and it makes it's weird how little things like that scene of him just putting it on, like it makes me understand his costume a little bit better and like it even more, because I'm like, that's something I could make theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely were trying to, and honestly, I'll just be truthful. Not a lot of it, but a few things as we were creating and moving along, we were like, okay, what should we do with this? I don't know. Think of something and go with it. And that's kind of what that was. That was actually just thought of on the page. It wasn't, part of our master plan or anything like that. But, and I think that's what makes the, like someone like yourself respond to it like that, because you're seeing it, it's kind of a spontaneous thing,
It feels
Like,
organic.
yeah, it's organic. I'm in the car. I got to change. Okay, let me just take it off this shirt and take off, whatever, and put on this thing here and or whatever. And that's kind of how that went. Now, as we move forward, there'll probably be some more, more solid approaches to it. But hey, just based off of your response there, I think we may have a winner. I think we may just keep it. Keep it that way. I know for sure this first arc is going to be that way. So
Yeah, well, I mean, like that's one of the cool things about Luke and Danny is they're just guys. They're like the quote unquote street level heroes and everything like that. And it makes sense to me that like they would be like me, where sometimes you just have to change your shirt in the car. And like, I don't know, there's like a certain level of approachability to it that I don't know, it's kind of like you were talking about earlier with like the, you know, their size and their body types and everything like that. When you see those characters and how they work in like their bodies and like their motion and everything like that, it's like visually you can understand them without even having to read David's script.
Right.
And I think that's great.
Oh yeah. Right. And that's the whole point, is just creating that narrative for every character.
Mm-hmm. So
Visual narrative, I should say.
What's that?
Visual narrative.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about your collaborators, because I feel like I would be a total jerk if I didn't mention them. But you have a heck of a team. You got, I mean, David Walker writing. I'm probably going to mispronounce his last name, but Lee Luffridge, is that how you pronounce it?
It's Lowridge.
Lowridge. Okay, Lee Lowridge on colors and Clayton Cowles like lettering. For you, like, I mean, it's like Lee and Clayton are just the best in the biz in what they do. But like for the four of you, like, what is it like? What makes them collaborators that combine so well with your work? It's a big question. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, man, there's a lot of back and forth. More so, I think, from the artistic side. I mean, me and David. I'll speak on David. I would say, because our thinking is. And I'm not just saying this just because it's almost like we're one person.
You guys are pretty simpatico.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, he'll have an idea about something, and I'm like, dude, that's exactly what I was thinking. Or, you know, something like that. So it's been absolutely a joy to work with him. We came up with this concept. You know, since you had the first issue, you know that, you know, kind of the central part of what will be the central part of this arc is this necklace.
Mm-hmm.
What is this thing? Why is it so important, or whatever? By issue 3, you'll see where it came from. And it's something that we're introducing to the Marvel Universe, I think, for the first time.
That's cool.
And it is something that easily could have been introduced a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not 100% sure if it ever was, but I'm pretty confident the way that we're doing it is different, because it will probably, our hope is for it to be a staple in the Marvel Universe moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty big deal.
Man, you're killing me. Now I want to know.
Of course, that's the whole point, man. It's like you gotta leave those nuggets for people to be excited about. So, you know, that's just, you know, where we are. And again, that was something that he said, Sanford, what do you think about if we introduce this thing? And I was like, dude, I've been wanting to do something like that for a long time. I just didn't know how to put it together. I didn't know how to articulate it, I guess. And that was one of the things that, you know, again, he's great at articulating. That's why he's a writer. So.
It's good for him that he is.
Yeah, exactly.
But so, like with Lee, do you guys communicate back and forth? Like, did you, when you guys were originally getting the book together, did you guys kind of figure out how you wanted everything to look together?
Oh yeah, absolutely. A lot of back and forth with that. It's so funny because I'm very anal about color.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of liquid color. I'm not talking about the company. I'm sorry. I don't know if that company still exists. I can't remember.
I don't think they do. You mean like the old? Yeah. Wasn't it like this? You mean the studio?
Yeah, the studio.
Yeah, I don't think they do.
Yeah, but you know, it's the same style. You know, but not a fan. You know, it only works for certain things, right? But even now, I just think that this is such a illustrator. In my opinion, I think the illustrator has taken back some of the position of power here with comic creation. You know, the writer had so much of it for a very long time, and then just kind of taking it a step further. I'll speak on the big two, Marvel and DC. They weren't really, there was a time where my work would not be on this book. You know, there would be a time where a guy like, trying to think of who's really popular right now. There's so many guys right now.
This is bad. Like, I'm even struggling to think of who's popular right now. You mean like Marvel and DC?
Yeah, well, I mean, they work. See, I think that's why it's hard for me to say right now, because all the guys I'm thinking of, they're not really doing anything at Marvel or DC anymore. They're over at
like Image.
They're doing a lot of independent. They create their own stuff, which is, well, I'll speak on that then. There was a time where Marvel and DC was the end all be all, right? It's like now it's more of, let me work at Marvel and DC, build my name and position, as a creator. And now that I have an audience, I'm going to go over here, and do the thing that is all me.
And then you can make money off of it because people know who you are.
Because people know you are, it's a lot more viable now, because you proved yourself over at the big two. So that's kind of that position, that creator position now has definitely elevated over the last few years. It's kind of weird, because it's the Image Revolution 2.5. They did it again, but it was kind of like in the early 2000s or something like that, when they were just resurging, and they changed the whole landscape of the Image brand, and it wasn't about the Wildcats and the Youngbloods of that time anymore. It was more about the Invincibles and the Walking Deads and all those books that kind of came out around that time. Forgot some of the others, but those are the two that kind of stick out. You know what I mean? There's a lot more independent feel.
Yeah. Well, and they were much more story centric, because
story-centric.
Yeah, I mean, I was, don't get me wrong, like, I grew up, like, worshiping at the altar of Jim Lee and Wildcats, but at the same time, like, you read something, like, now, like, you read, like, I mean, even back then, like, Walking Dead and Invincible, even though, they definitely had their influences, they felt more built on, like, solid ground. There was a better foundation to them, that rather than just being, like, more or less their influences.
Right. And that's the thing, is like, now, again, the creative side is taking more precedence over the industry side, if that makes sense. Like corporate side, I should say. The creators can rise above the brands of Marvel and DC, if that makes sense.
It totally does. I mean, and you were talking about how you don't think you would have had this job before, but that you could say that about a lot of Marvel books. Like, like, I really like the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, which is like the last. I mean, if you would have told me 3 years ago that my favorite comic was going to be the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, I would have laughed at you.
Right.
But now I love it, and it's Erica Henderson is on art, and her style is not something you probably would have ever seen at Marvel before, and and Ryan North is the guy who's writing it, and he does a comic called Dinosaur Comics, in which the art is the same every single issue, so to speak, and I don't know. I mean, it's pretty fascinating, because I feel like the 2.5 revolution, like as you were saying, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it's kind of forced, Marvel and DC to a certain degree to like look outside of their norm because they're being pressured into. I'm not saying it's in any way a bad thing, but like they're having to embrace sides of themselves that they never really expected, just like I am as a reader.
Right. This having I definitely pick up a whole lot more Image titles than I do any other
Mm-hmm.
um, company. Unfortunately, I don't pick up any. I was interested in, well, okay, let's look at DC, which, now, I mean, I don't know if you want to go down this path with where they're going now, but there was kind of the New 52,
Mm-hmm.
kind of halfway through that whole run. They put out these books like Gotham Academy and
Mm-hmm.
that and Batgirl, which was really interesting the way that they did the Batgirl thing. That Batgirl was huge in spite of, they didn't relaunch it, which I think was okay, but then there was something kind of off about that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I just felt like it was such a
Huge
big
shift.
shift. It needed a relaunch for it
Yeah.
to feel right. It just felt kind of like, oh man, in the middle of this run or whatever, number run. But that, I was really interested in those books. I kept up with those books. Really love what Babs Tarr, what she was doing on that book. It was just so off the cuff from what DC is known for. I was really hoping that they would really just kind of. I thought those two books, because they were so successful, that it would kick down the door, and then you saw this DCU thing that they were doing,
Mm-hmm.
which that lasted like a month. I don't know what happened. And I was like, wow, this is pretty, profound. They're about to do it. They're finally going to do it, and I don't know what's going to happen now. So, I'm hoping that they take note of what was started there and see how diverse those books were and how well they were doing. They were selling greater than any other title that they had, other than a Batman title.
Mm-hmm.
With every other title, they were beating.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something to be said about those books that are kind of off the beaten path. More so with visually, even story wise. Something to be said about that.
Yeah, I mean Gotham Academy, like that's another book that I never expected to love, but I mean not that I had any problem with it, but I mean it's a school book that's basically, it's kind of like Scooby-Doo-ish. And
Yeah.
and I don't mean that in a bad way in any
Right.
way, but it definitely didn't seem like something you would normally see out of the Gotham world, and it worked. It worked really well, and I don't know. I mean, I totally agree with you, by the way, on the Batgirl thing. Like, it was so weird because no, normally as a comic reader, you expect 25 or 50 to be the big change issue or something like that, but I think it was like 41, and
Right.
it's such a weird 41st issue to have this huge, like
Yeah.
shift that takes place, and then you have a completely different art style and completely different writing style, and I don't know. I mean, it worked, but at the same time, I feel you on the fact that it might have made a little bit more sense as the number one.
Exactly. But again, that's it's sometimes what you think is logical may not be that logical.
Yeah. No, I think that we're going to see some interesting stuff coming forward because, like, it does seem like a lot of people want different things out of their comics than they used to. It used to be like, just give me my Wolverine and that's all I need. But now it's like I'm reading my favorite books at Marvel are Squirrel Girl and like The Vision and God, what is the other one? Oh, like Patsy Walker Hellcat. Like, I really enjoy those books,
Wow.
and like I can't believe those words even came out of my mouth because like I was ride or die with Wolverine with bone claws when I was a kid.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, it's a changing industry, but it has resulted in like, great things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh,
Um, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just saying really quick. The artist I just learned about a month ago that the artist for Patsy Walker, Hellcat, she lives about 45 minutes away from me. I saw her at a book signing a month ago,
Yeah.
and she just politely came up and said, "Hey, can you sign my book?" And I signed the book, and we got to talking, and somehow artwork came up, and she said something like, "Yeah, I got to get back and finish up some deadlines too. It's kind of crazy for me right now." And I said, "Oh, cool. What are you working on?" He said, "Oh, I'm the new artist for Hellcat." And I was like, "Hellcat as in Marvel Hellcat?" She was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh my God, you got to be kidding me." So that was pretty surreal. I mean, I live in South Carolina. I mean, we have a lot of creators here, though, man. There's a lot. Hickman lives here. Gosh, just because I said that. Babs Tarr, she lives not too far, about a couple of hours. Now we got Brittany Williams. She lives 45 minutes away from me. So yeah, we can all kind of get together and do a little powwow. We have some writers here too, Chris Sims and
Chad Bowers.
Yeah.
I used to actually be on another site, Multiversity Comics.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and Chad wrote for us, and I've hung out plenty of times with Chad, and he's an awesome guy. But
those guys are great.
I do think it's really funny how like it seems like there's like, I don't know if it's like a hero's influence or what, but like it seems like Carolina has, like North and South has like a pretty healthy comic book scene.
Yeah. I think heroes has been such a staple in all of our upbringing. I know that sounds kind of, like it. I guess in a way, yeah, heroes kind of raised us. It's like we were going to that show, that convention, since we were young and childless. We didn't have children. We were running around just starry-eyed and full of ambition, and it's still going strong. I don't know. It's a really interesting thing that that show is still the same type of show it's been since its beginnings. It never went corporate. I know you got a lot. Most of these cons are like corporate now. The big ones, anyway, the ones that've been around just as long as heroes, they all, they're under
an umbrella.
Some umbrella, which is fine. But it's just something to be said about this show and how it's kind of been this nurturing, entity, for us for the last 15 years, 12 to 15 years since I've been around. So, yeah, and it's just it's kind of a really nice deal.
Yeah, I actually talked to Jason Latour about that a couple, like 4 or 5 podcasts ago, and he was telling me about how when he was like much younger, he would like go around to all of the artists and show his art off and get critiques from people, and he was like talking about how like it was really surprising because a lot of the best critiques came from artists that I didn't expect. They weren't my favorites. Like they weren't the people that I was expecting. But I don't know. I mean, it is pretty cool. Like it's like you guys kind of have a home there that you can all kind of share. It's like in a weird way, it's like your guys is like one time a year mall that you guys get to hang out and you guys get to like learn together and commiserate and everything, and you get to meet other locals and stuff. But see, that's a problem for me. I live in Anchorage, Alaska. We don't have cons.
I don't know why I thought you were in. For some reason, Utah came in my mind.
No, much colder and much more north.
I was going to say much more north and more cold. Wow.
Yeah, not close to Carolina, that is for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
But that's actually all I have for you, man. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, same here, man. This is really great.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Sanford Greene, on Twitter at Sanford Greene and his work in Power Man and Iron Fist at Marvel Comics. You can find more Sketch content at Sketched. That's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at SketchComic. Like us on Facebook at /Sketched. And if you're an iTunes listener, give us a rating or review. Thanks for listening and tune in next week for another episode.